You ever noticed how easily we feel guilty? Not because we've committed some grand crime, but because we simply exist as we are. You wake up late, and already there's that whisper, "You should have done better." You take a moment for yourself, and it murmurs, "You're being selfish." Not enough. Guilt has become the background noise of modern life. It hums quietly beneath everything we do. It's there when you work too much and when you rest too long, when you speak honestly and when you stay silent. It's as if we've been trained to apologize for being human. Now, isn't that peculiar? That the very thing that makes life possible, the spontaneity of being, has been turned into a reason for shame. You see, we've mistaken guilt for morality. We think that the more guilty we feel, the more virtuous we must be. We wear it like a badge of conscience, when in truth, it's a mask of fear. Because guilt is not awareness. It's self-punishment, masquerading as wisdom. But here's the paradox. The more you try to be good out of guilt, the less good you actually become. Have you noticed? The person constantly trying to prove they're kind becomes brittle and self-absorbed. The one trying to appear pure starts to resent their own humanity. It's exhausting to be forever fixing yourself. What if guilt isn't the voice of your soul, but the echo of someone else's control? Think about it. You were born into a world of should and shouldn't. Before you even knew your own name, you were taught that pleasure is dangerous, desire is suspect, and being yourself is somehow an offense. So you learned to split, to act good, while secretly judging your own nature. And this split, this inner conflict, is the root of endless suffering. But what if there was never anything to fix? What if you could live without that shadow whispering not enough behind every breath? The truth is, guilt doesn't make you moral, it makes you mechanical. You act out of fear, not out of love. You obey, but you never awaken. So let's explore what lies beneath that heavy cloak of guilt. Let's see where it came from and why we cling to it as if it were proof of our worth. Because perhaps, just perhaps, when you stop feeling guilty for being human, you begin to discover what it really means to be alive. Let's look more closely at this strange addiction, this secret pleasure of feeling guilty. You see, guilt is a very curious thing. It's one of the few emotions that people actually cherish. We cling to it as though it were a moral compass, as though by constantly feeling bad we were somehow doing good. But in truth, guilt is not a sign of awakening. It's a sign that we still believe we can stand outside of life and judge it. It's remarkable, isn't it? Human beings have created entire systems of religion, politics, and psychology built upon the assumption that there is something fundamentally wrong with them. We have been told, in 1,000 subtle ways, that existence itself is a kind of mistake. That being born was a problem in need of correction. And so, from childhood, we are trained to divide ourselves. One part of us becomes the judge, the other the criminal. The judge scolds, the criminal apologizes, and the play goes on forever. We call this being responsible, but it's actually a kind of inner tyranny. We have turned conscience into a courtroom. When you make a mistake, instead of learning, you punish yourself. When you act naturally, instead of trusting life, you analyze it to death. You have forgotten that the universe does not make errors, it makes experiences. There's an old myth, that long ago we fell from grace, and ever since we've been trying to climb back up by being good. But who defines what good means? The church? The government? The parents who were themselves conditioned to feel guilty. The truth is that guilt has been the most effective tool of social control ever invented. Because if I can make you feel guilty for being yourself, I never have to force you to obey me. You'll do it voluntarily. You'll discipline yourself. You'll keep yourself in check. You'll become the perfect prisoner. And the tragedy is that you'll call it virtue. But life, in its essence, has no guilt at all. The trees don't feel guilty for growing too tall. The river doesn't apologize for flooding the valley. The lion doesn't feel remorse for killing the antelope. Only human beings manage to turn their natural impulses into moral crises. That's because we've forgotten that morality is not the same as awareness. Awareness is fluid, alive, spontaneous. It responds to each moment uniquely. Morality, on the other hand, is rigid, a set of rules carved into stone by those who thought they knew better than life itself. When you act from awareness, you are in tune with the harmony of existence. When you act from guilt, you are trying to outsmart it. And that's why so many good people are miserable. They are constantly trying to be better than they already are. But how can you improve on what the universe is already doing perfectly? You see, the great cosmic joke is that guilt keeps you from being truly good, because real goodness is effortless. It's the fragrance of freedom. The man who does good because he loves life is radiant. The man who does good because he fears punishment is a hypocrite, and he knows it. That's why guilt always carries a hint of vanity. Look how guilty I feel. I must be a deeply moral person. But what if you could live without that constant moral self-surveillance? What if goodness didn't require a whip, but only presence? I'm not suggesting we throw away compassion or accountability. On the contrary, when you stop living under the dictatorship of guilt, you finally discover real compassion, because then you no longer help others to prove your virtue. You help them because you can feel their life as your own. The end of guilt is not the beginning of chaos, it's the beginning of love. And love, unlike guilt, cannot be commanded. It arises naturally when control ends. So before we can talk about freedom, or forgiveness, or even morality, we must first look directly at this strange reflex to condemn ourselves. Because until you see that guilt is just another mask of the ego pretending to be holy, you will keep feeding it, polishing it, and calling it conscience. Let's see now how this illusion was born, and why it clings to us so fiercely. You see, the ego is a very clever illusion. It doesn't want to disappear, so it will use anything, even guilt, to keep itself alive. Guilt is the ego's favorite toy because it allows you to feel both important and miserable at the same time. You become the center of your own tragedy. I should have done better. I should have known. I should be different. Notice how personal guilt always begins with I. It reinforces the very sense of separateness that lies at the root of all suffering. It makes you feel like the author of life, as though the universe were a drama revolving around your mistakes. But have you ever stopped to ask, who is this I that claims responsibility for everything? Who is this voice that scolds you for being imperfect? If you look closely, you'll find that it's just a pattern of thought, an echo repeating what others once told you. It's your parents, your teachers, your culture, all whispering inside your head, be good, behave, don't make a mess. And now that chorus has become your own inner soundtrack. The ego, you see, is terrified of silence, because in silence it disappears. So it fills the space with noise, with worry, with judgment, with guilt. As long as you feel guilty, you feel like someone to fix, someone to improve, someone to save. That's how the illusion sustains itself, through endless self-improvement. The ego says, one day I'll be pure. One day I'll be enlightened. But first, I must punish myself for being so unenlightened. And so the mind creates an endless treadmill of guilt and redemption, a spiritual merry-go-round where nothing truly changes, because the one who's trying to change is the illusion itself. That's why guilt feels strangely addictive. It gives you a sense of identity, even if it hurts. You might hate feeling guilty, but at least you feel like someone. And that someone is the ego's lifeline. You see, the truth is far simpler and far more radical. You are not a sinner trying to become a saint. You are life, pretending to be a person. You are the ocean, momentarily convinced it's a wave. And waves don't feel guilty for their shape. They rise, they fall, they crash, they dissolve. The ocean doesn't apologize for them, it celebrates them. But the ego says, no, I must control this wave. I must make it behave properly. And so, the natural rhythm of life becomes a moral problem. That's why guilt always leads to control, and control leads to anxiety. The moment you believe you are personally responsible for managing the entire flow of life, you live in permanent tension. Have you noticed how even spiritual people feel guilty about not being spiritual enough? They meditate and feel guilty for thinking. They help others and feel guilty for enjoying it. They can't even relax without wondering if they're wasting time. The ego has turned virtue into another performance. But here's the paradox. The more you try to purify yourself, the more the ego strengthens. Because every effort implies a you who can make it happen. The very act of striving becomes a subtle declaration of separateness. Real freedom, therefore, is not found in purification, it's found in recognition. You recognize that the one who feels guilty is the same illusion that feels proud. Two sides of the same coin. When that recognition dawns, guilt loses its grip. Not because you've overcome it, but because you see through it. It collapses under its own absurdity. And in that seeing, something marvelous happens. Laughter. You laugh at the mind's elaborate theater, at its endless confessions, its solemn attempts to fix what was never broken. You laugh, not cruelly, but tenderly, like watching a child taking its game too seriously. That laughter is the beginning of awakening, because laughter is the sound of the ego dissolving. The moment you stop taking your guilt seriously, it can no longer bind you. So, when guilt next appears, when that inner voice begins its usual sermon, don't argue with it. Don't resist it. Just watch it, as you would watch a cloud pass across the sky. It's only weather in the mind, and beyond that weather, the sky remains untouched. That sky is what you are. Vast, open, and entirely innocent. Let's go a little deeper now into how this illusion of guilt confuses love with morality, and why true goodness arises only when the need to be good disappears. Now, let's look more closely at what we call being good. Most people think goodness is a matter of rules, of doing what's right, avoiding what's wrong, and feeling terribly guilty in between. But life doesn't work that way. Have you noticed that some of the kindest people you know never talk about being good, and that some of the most self-righteous are secretly full of resentment? The difference is simple. One acts from awareness, the other from conditioning. You see, awareness doesn't come from a list of commandments. It comes from being fully alive in the moment. When you are present, you don't need to remember what's right, you see what's right. It's as natural as blinking when dust hits your eye. But the moral mind is not interested in seeing, it's interested in controlling. It says, if I can just follow enough rules, I'll finally be pure. And so people build enormous structures of virtue, religions, ideologies, movements, all to protect themselves from their own humanness. And yet, beneath the surface, the guilt grows stronger, because rules can never reach the heart. You can force yourself to behave, but you cannot force yourself to love. True morality has nothing to do with guilt. It arises when you see the interconnection of all things. When you see that hurting another is hurting yourself, kindness becomes effortless, not a duty, a delight. That's why awareness is the end of moral struggle. When you are aware, you don't need commandments. When you are asleep, even commandments won't help. The trouble is that society doesn't trust awareness, it trusts obedience. Because awareness is unpredictable, it can't be institutionalized. A truly awake person may follow the law, or may not, depending on the moment. And that terrifies the people who run the systems, so they teach you guilt instead. Guilt is predictable. Guilt makes you controllable. Awareness makes you free. And freedom, from the standpoint of authority, is chaos. You can see why most systems prefer a guilty citizen to a free one. A guilty person will buy more, pray more, work harder, and never feel finished. He's perfect for business, religion, and politics because he's always chasing redemption. But awareness doesn't chase, it simply is. It sees the play for what it is and dances accordingly. That's what Jesus meant when he said, "Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin." He wasn't suggesting laziness, he was pointing to freedom. The lilies don't compare or apologize, they grow because growing is what they do, and that's what you are. 2, a living expression of the universe, unfolding according to its own mysterious rhythm. To feel guilty for that is the ultimate arrogance. It's like the ocean feeling guilty for its waves, or the sun apologizing for shining too brightly. The only true sin, if we can use that word at all, is to deny your own nature, to refuse to see the divine in the ordinary, the sacred in the simple act of being. Once awareness dawns, guilt becomes impossible. You may still feel regret, the natural sadness of learning, but not guilt. Regret says, "Ah, I see now." Guilt says, "I am wrong." And the second is a lie. Because you cannot be wrong, you can only be unconscious. And even that unconsciousness was part of the dance. You see, life is not a moral problem to be solved. It's a game to be played, a rhythm to be felt. The only way to lose is to take it too seriously. When awareness replaces morality, everything becomes lighter. You begin to laugh more easily, forgive more quickly, and love without calculation. Not because you become perfect, but because you no longer need to be. The game continues, but now you play knowingly. And when you play knowingly, every gesture becomes sacred, every breath, every mistake, every act of letting go. Let's move deeper still to see how this recognition transforms our daily life, how guilt dissolves naturally once you realize that you were never the one in charge of being good in the first place. Have you noticed how guilt sneaks into the smallest corners of daily life? You wake up late and immediately feel guilty for not being productive enough. You take a day off and feel guilty for not hustling. You say no to someone and feel guilty for protecting your own energy. Even joy feels suspicious, as if happiness must always be justified. This is the strange theater of modern life. Everyone pretending to be in control, while secretly drowning in guilt for not being perfect. We've created a civilization that worships achievement and then punishes itself for never feeling fulfilled. It's a cycle of self-torture, disguised as self-improvement. People don't even relax anymore. They schedule rest and feel guilty for enjoying it too much. They go on vacation and apologize in advance for being away. They even feel guilty about their spiritual practices. I missed meditation today. I must be failing. Can you see how absurd this is? We've managed to turn even inner peace into another performance. But the truth is that guilt doesn't make you responsible. It makes you rigid. You start living by scripts, not by presence. You smile when you're supposed to smile, apologize when you're supposed to apologize, and hide the rest behind polite exhaustion. And yet, beneath all that, something in you knows this can't be what being alive was meant to feel like. Life was never meant to be a courtroom. It was meant to be a conversation. Imagine for a moment that you're listening to music. If you start judging every note, that one was too high, that one too soft, that one too long, the whole thing collapses. The melody becomes unbearable. But when you simply listen, without interference, the notes make sense together. That's how life works. Guilt is the constant critic interrupting the song. Awareness is the silence that lets the music play. Now, think of your relationships. How often does guilt masquerade as love? We say, "I'll do this for you because I'd feel bad if I didn't." That isn't kindness, that's fear dressed in empathy's clothing. True kindness doesn't calculate or bargain. It flows freely from seeing the other as yourself. And yet so many couples, friends, even parents and children are bound together not by love but by guilt. They call it loyalty, duty, sacrifice. But it's really just the fear of being seen as selfish. The result is resentment. People start giving what they don't have, saying yes when they mean no, pretending peace while silently suffocating. And then, of course, they feel guilty for feeling resentful. It's a perfect loop, the snake eating its own tail. But awareness breaks the loop. Because awareness sees the pattern without condemning it. It says, "Ah, there it is again, the guilt mechanism." And in seeing, you step out of the role. You realize that guilt is not who you are. It's a reflex, a conditioned echo. And the moment you see it as such, it loses its sacred power. It becomes just another passing cloud in the vast sky of consciousness. You see, the mind wants to be the master of life, but life cannot be mastered. It can only be met. Guilt is the mind's last attempt to maintain the illusion of control. It says, if I can't control events, at least I can control how bad I feel about them. But awareness doesn't play that game. It doesn't need to punish itself for being human. It knows that every mistake, every delay, every imperfection has its place in the great choreography. When you begin to live from that knowing, something miraculous happens. You relax. You stop carrying the world on your shoulders. You realize that you don't have to justify your existence to anyone, not even to yourself. And that relaxation is not laziness, it's sanity. It's the space where life can finally breathe through you instead of being managed by you. So the next time guilt whispers in your ear, you should be doing more, you should be different, simply smile. Notice it for what it is, an old echo from a world that forgot how to trust itself. You were never born to be perfect. You were born to be whole. And wholeness includes everything, even the part that feels guilty. The difference is, now you can see the play for what it is. And once you see the play, you are no longer trapped in the role. That's where real transformation begins. The mind doesn't really want to be free from guilt. It wants to manage it, to refine it, to keep just enough of it around to feel righteous. Because without guilt, who would it be? Have you ever noticed how uncomfortable we get when someone truly forgives us? When they say, it's all right, don't worry about it, something in us resists. We insist on feeling bad a little longer, as if guilt were a form of payment, a currency for our mistakes. We can't accept being let off the hook too easily. That's because guilt gives us a strange sense of power. It says, I did wrong, therefore I matter. It's the ego's way of keeping itself at the center of the universe, even in failure. And so, paradoxically, we hold on to guilt to preserve our importance. We become attached to our sins. We polish them, replay them, analyze them endlessly. We make shrines out of them. Look how terrible I was, we say, and secretly, we're proud of how deeply we can suffer. It's a strange vanity, the vanity of remorse. But have you ever met someone who has truly forgiven themselves? There's a lightness in them, a kind of quiet humor. They're no longer interested in proving their goodness or their guilt. They've stopped auditioning for life. They can laugh at themselves because they no longer believe in the story. The mind hates that kind of freedom because it can't control it. So it whispers, if you stop feeling guilty, you'll become careless, you'll hurt people, you'll turn into a monster. But have you noticed that guilt rarely prevents harm? It only prolongs suffering. The person who acts out of guilt is not guided by clarity, they're guided by fear. And fear, being blind, often causes the very thing it tries to avoid. The absence of guilt doesn't make you reckless, it makes you real. When you no longer need to be good, you can finally be kind. Because kindness isn't calculated, it flows from understanding. Imagine a child learning to walk. It falls, it bumps into things, it cries, and then it gets up again. We don't call that child sinful. We don't demand an apology. We understand that falling is part of walking. Why then do we refuse the same grace to ourselves? Because the mind wants to believe it's in control, that it can perfect itself through discipline, that it can earn salvation through guilt. It clings to guilt the way a drowning man clings to a rock, not realizing that the water itself would carry him if he just let go. The deeper irony is that guilt doesn't even belong to you. It's inherited, passed down like an old family heirloom, the moral debts of generations, accumulated and unquestioned. Your ancestors felt guilty for pleasure, for survival, for desire, for thinking freely. And here you are, centuries later, apologizing for existing. The entire system runs on this inheritance. Governments, religions, economies, all thriving on the assumption that you are not enough, that you must strive, repent, redeem. And yet, when you look around in the stillness of your own awareness, what's missing? What is so wrong with this moment? What needs fixing right now, other than your thought that something does? The mind can't answer that, because the question itself dissolves it. When guilt fades, the entire architecture of control begins to crumble. The priest, the politician, even the inner voice of the moralist, all lose their authority. What remains is silence. And the mind fears silence more than anything, because silence has no agenda. It cannot be manipulated. That's why people fill their lives with noise, not just literal noise, but emotional noise, mental noise, moral noise. They confuse motion with meaning. They equate struggle with virtue. But in truth, when you stop struggling to be good, you start being good not because you follow the rules, but because you no longer stand apart from life. You see others as yourself. You forgive as naturally as you breathe. And when guilt tries to return, as it inevitably will, you meet it with awareness, not obedience. You say, "Ah, my old friend, there you are, again." And just like that, its power vanishes. Because guilt only thrives in unawareness. The moment it's seen clearly, it loses its authority. And that's the secret the ego never wants you to discover. There comes a moment, perhaps while sitting quietly, or perhaps in the middle of some ordinary chaos, when you suddenly see the whole pattern. You see how guilt has been playing both roles in your inner drama, the judge and the accused, the sinner and the savior. And for a brief instant, you laugh. That laughter is not mockery, it's recognition. You see the absurdity of it all, how you've been arguing with yourself, punishing yourself, forgiving yourself, and calling it morality. The moment you see it clearly, the whole performance loses its grip. Awareness doesn't fix guilt, it dissolves it by shining through it. You realize there's nothing to atone for. Every thought, every impulse, every so-called mistake was part of the unfolding. You were never out of alignment with life, only out of sync with your own acceptance of it. This realization often comes as relief first, then as a kind of quiet awe. You start to notice how much of your life was spent rehearsing for forgiveness that was never needed. You forgive yourself for not knowing sooner. And then you see even that was unnecessary because the timing was perfect. That's the first taste of freedom, the moment when you stop arguing with what is. Of course, the mind will try to reclaim its throne. It will whisper, "Be careful. If you let go of guilt completely, you'll become irresponsible. You'll start doing terrible things." But you can smile at that voice now, because you understand it's just the echo of fear pretending to be virtue. Real responsibility doesn't come from fear, it comes from awareness. The person who truly sees does not need to be forced to act wisely. Seeing itself is the action. When you touch a hot stove, you don't feel guilty. You pull your hand away. Awareness works the same way. It responds directly, without punishment or drama. And that's how true morality functions, not as an external code, but as an inner intelligence. This intelligence has no rules, but it has rhythm. It doesn't preach, but it perceives. It doesn't say you must, it simply moves in harmony with life. You begin to trust that rhythm. You find yourself saying what you mean, doing what feels right, not because of approval or disapproval, but because it flows naturally. There's a freshness in it, a kind of innocent spontaneity. You start to notice small miracles, how things seem to align when you stop forcing them, how people respond differently when you stop carrying guilt in your voice, how even your body feels lighter, as though it too had been waiting to be forgiven. That's the paradox. The moment you stop trying to be good, you start to act from genuine goodness. Because love, compassion, kindness, these are not virtues to achieve. They're natural states that surface when resistance ends. And when guilt falls away, humor returns. You see how ridiculous the whole enterprise of self-condemnation really is. How the same mind that trips over itself then scolds itself for falling. You can almost hear the universe chuckling softly in the background, as if saying, "Finally, you've caught on." That's why enlightenment has always been described as a kind of cosmic laughter, the laughter of waking up from a dream you thought was real. And once you've tasted that freedom, you can't quite go back to taking guilt seriously. It may visit, but it can no longer stay. Because awareness has no room for shame. It recognizes that the shadow and the light belong to the same whole, that both serve the dance of becoming. And this doesn't make you indifferent or reckless. On the contrary, it makes you more sensitive, more alive. Because when you stop judging the movement of life, you begin to feel it. You feel the rhythm in every encounter, every loss, every silence. You begin to sense that there is an intelligence far beyond morality, the intelligence of balance, of timing, of harmony. That intelligence was guiding you all along. And as you relax into it, guilt transforms into gratitude. You see that even your mistakes were part of your education in love. The ego tried to make you guilty for being human. Awareness shows you the holiness of being human. That's the first light of freedom, and it changes everything. Here's the great paradox: you will never be free of guilt until you stop trying to be free of it. Every effort to get rid of guilt is just another expression of guilt itself. It's the mind scolding itself for having a mind. I shouldn't feel guilty, it says, and now you're guilty for being guilty. The trap is subtle because the ego hides behind good intentions. It says, I'm only trying to be better. I'm only trying to grow. But behind that effort lies the same old illusion that there is a separate you who can improve what life is already doing perfectly. You see, guilt feeds on resistance. The more you fight it, the stronger it grows. It thrives on your disapproval, just like a fire feeds on the air trying to smother it. So what happens if you stop fighting? If you stop trying to fix yourself, or justify yourself, or purify yourself? A curious thing, the guilt has nothing left to grip. It's like trying to catch water with a fist. The tighter you squeeze, the more it escapes. But when you open your hand, the water rests there effortlessly. That's what awareness does. It opens, it allows. It stops trying to improve the moment and simply watches. And in that watching, the storm loses its meaning. You realize that guilt was never asking to be solved, it was asking to be seen. Because guilt, in its strange way, was always a form of longing, a longing to return to wholeness. The problem is that the mind mistook the message. It tried to achieve wholeness by fragmenting itself even more, by condemning part of its own nature. It's like a wave feeling guilty for rising above the ocean, when the ocean itself wanted to rise. Do you see? There was never a mistake. The entire drama was life exploring itself through you, the light and the shadow, the control and the surrender, the guilt and the release. The moment you see that, the energy that once went into self-punishment turns into laughter. And that laughter, again, is the sound of the game being seen through. But the mind will ask, then what should I do? And the answer is nothing. There's nothing to do. The doing is the problem. You cannot do letting go. You can only notice that it's already happening. You were never holding life, life was holding you. Freedom doesn't come by resisting the cage, it comes by realizing there was never a cage at all. The guilt you felt was never proof of sin, it was the echo of your belief in separateness. And separation itself was just a dream. So the end of guilt is not a triumph, it's a homecoming. It's the quiet sigh of recognition. Ah, so this is what I've been fighting all along myself. And when that sinks in, there's a kind of melting, a soft release in the chest, a deep exhale you didn't know you'd been holding for a lifetime. You look around and everything seems new. The trees are no longer spectators in your moral drama, they're participants in the same cosmic comedy. The birds are innocent, and so are you. Nothing has changed, and yet everything has shifted. Because when you stop fighting your guilt, you realize it was never an enemy. It was a teacher in disguise, pointing you back to presence. Even guilt belongs. Even shame belongs. They too are waves in the same ocean. And in seeing that, the distinction between good and bad starts to dissolve. You begin to sense a deeper harmony, one that includes both notes of the chord. That harmony is not moral, it's musical. You stop measuring life by perfection and start listening to it as melody. And that's when true freedom begins, not the freedom of escaping what you are, but the freedom of not needing to escape. To feel guilty, then, is no longer a failure, it's just another experience arising and fading like everything else. You let it move through you without resistance, the way wind moves through a field. You stop being the warden of your inner prison. You realize the door was never locked, and as you walk out, there's no victory parade, only silence, sunlight, and the faint sound of laughter. Because you were never guilty. You were simply dreaming you were. When you look deeply enough, you realize that the idea of guilt makes sense only inside a very small story, the story of a separate self who believes he stands apart from the rest of existence. Outside of that story, in the vastness of what is, there's no such thing as guilt. There is only movement. There is only change. A tree doesn't apologize for losing its leaves. The ocean doesn't feel ashamed when it becomes a storm. The universe doesn't regret the supernova that gave birth to worlds. Yet somehow, you, a ripple in this grand dance, have been taught to believe that you, and you alone, are supposed to be perfect. What an extraordinary illusion. Because the truth is, you are not apart from this dance, you are the dance. The universe breathes through you, thinks through you, errs through you, laughs through you. Every so-called mistake you've ever made was an experiment in awareness. Every wrong turn was the universe exploring another possibility of itself. When you understand that, guilt becomes impossible, not because you refuse responsibility, but because there is no longer a you separate from the act. You don't do life. Life does you. Just as a wave doesn't move independently from the ocean. You don't move independently from the whole. You are not an intruder here. You are the expression of here. And yet we keep trying to stand outside the process and evaluate it. We say, this should not have happened, or I should not have done that. But who is the I that stands in judgment of the universe? The moment you try to judge the totality, you're like a single note trying to rewrite the symphony. Now, that doesn't mean chaos or indifference. On the contrary, when you see that you are the symphony, you start to play your part beautifully, not out of obligation, but out of joy. There is a natural ethics born of awareness, not of guilt. It's the ethics of harmony. A musician doesn't need a moral law to play in tune. She listens. She feels the rhythm. In the same way, when you're awake, you move in resonance with life. This is why mystics from all ages have said that enlightenment is not the attainment of virtue, but the end of the illusion of separation. Because when you know yourself as life itself, you can no longer condemn what life does. Does that mean everything is good? No, good and bad lose their ordinary meaning. They dissolve into a larger perspective where both are necessary. Like light and shadow, they give contrast to each other. Without night, there would be no meaning to day. Without error, there would be no discovery. Without guilt, you might never have looked for freedom. It's all part of the balance. So when you drop guilt, you don't become immoral, you become musical. You stop playing the notes of punishment and pride and begin to improvise with the melody of being. And in that improvisation, you rediscover innocence, not the innocence of ignorance, but the innocence of wisdom. The innocence that knows it has never been separate. Children have it, and saints rediscover it. It's the innocence that laughs even in the face of its own imperfection, because it sees that imperfection is how perfection expresses itself. Now, imagine the freedom of living from that understanding, waking up each morning not to prove your worth, but to explore existence, to breathe, to stumble, to love, to lose, to begin again, not as duties but as dances. There's no guilt in the dance. There's only movement, there's only rhythm. And when you finally feel that rhythm, not as an idea, but as a vibration in your bones, guilt evaporates like mist in sunlight. You begin to see that even those who wronged you, even those who hurt you, were also part of the same unfolding. They too were playing their role in this mysterious composition. Forgiveness becomes effortless, not because you decide to forgive, but because there's no longer anything to forgive. You see the whole, and in seeing the whole, all opposites merge into a single flow. This is what I mean when I say, you are not a sinner in the cosmos. You are the cosmos playing human. And when the cosmos laughs through you, all guilt becomes laughter. Because how can the ocean feel guilty for its own waves? There comes a time when words no longer help. You've understood the ideas, the metaphors, the paradoxes, and yet something inside you still clings, still asks, yes, but what do I do now? And that's when silence becomes the only teacher left. If you sit quietly and listen, not with your ears, but with your whole being, you might notice something subtle beneath the noise of the mind. A space, a presence. It's not judging you, not correcting you. It's simply there. That presence has been with you from the beginning. It was there when you felt proud, and it was there when you felt ashamed. It never condemned you, because it never divided you. It's the background of every thought, the stillness beneath every emotion, and it remains untouched no matter what story the mind tells. When you notice it, guilt has nowhere to land. Because guilt needs time, it needs a past and a future. But presence is timeless. It's the eternal now in which no mistake can survive. You might think, but I did hurt others. I did make wrong choices. Yes, and yet those moments are gone, dissolved into memory. What remains of them now, except your thought about them? Even the thought is not a problem, if you see it for what it is, just another ripple in awareness. You see, the mind confuses remembering with reliving, but awareness doesn't relive anything, it only observes. And in that observation, all wounds begin to heal, because they are no longer fed by resistance. Sit with that for a while. You may feel a deep sadness arise, not guilt, but something softer, a kind of mourning for how long you've been at war with yourself. That's natural. That sadness is the closing of an old chapter. Let it come. Let it wash through. It's not punishment, it's purification through understanding. And then, slowly, you start to sense a gentleness underneath it all, a warmth, as if life itself was saying, you were never the problem. That warmth is what religions tried to name as divine love, but words made it sound distant and conditional. In truth, it's as close as your own breath. When you breathe in, life says, yes. When you breathe out, it says, thank you. That's the real confession, the real prayer, not words of guilt, but the silent rhythm of being alive. And as you sit there, perhaps you notice something even more astonishing. That presence doesn't only forgive you, it doesn't even understand the concept of forgiveness. Because in its eyes, there was never anything to forgive. All along, you were the one inventing the courtroom, the trial, the sentence. And life was patiently waiting outside saying, are you done? Now imagine living from that space where you no longer interpret each thought or feeling as evidence for or against yourself, where you simply allow life to breathe through you, moment by moment, without editing, without guilt. In that openness, something miraculous happens. You begin to sense the same innocence in everyone else. You see that behind every cruel word, every defensive gesture, every human failure, there's the same frightened longing to be whole, and you stop taking things personally. You stop judging, not out of indifference, but out of understanding. Silence does that. It erases the imaginary border between me and you, and once that border fades, compassion ceases to be a virtue. It becomes as natural as gravity. You don't forgive people because you should. You forgive them because there's no longer a separate you left to hold a grudge. That's the quiet revolution that happens when guilt dissolves, not a moral awakening, but a return to reality. A reality so simple, so unassuming, that the mind overlooks it. This moment is already whole. There's nothing to prove, nothing to fix, nothing to justify.
Nothing.
You are as complete in your silence as the moon is complete, even when half of it is hidden from view. And if you listen deeply, you might even hear the faint laughter of the universe, not mocking but delighted, like a parent watching a child finally drop a heavy toy they no longer need. That laughter is the sound of your freedom, because guilt can only exist where silence is forgotten. And once you remember the silence, guilt has no place to return to. At this point, something extraordinary begins to dawn on you, the realization that nothing actually needed to be fixed, that every moment of striving, every cycle of guilt and release was part of the same divine movement. You begin to see that the whole drama of human life, the rise, the fall, the repentance, the redemption, was never about reaching perfection. It was about waking up from the idea that you ever needed to. For most of your life, you were like a man searching frantically for his glasses, not realizing they were already on his nose. You looked for peace everywhere in religion, in morality, in guilt, in virtue, and all along it was quietly sitting here, breathing with you. The irony is almost too perfect. You've spent a lifetime chasing what could never leave you, and now for the first time you stop running. You see that the guilt, the pride, the effort, they were all waves in the same ocean of awareness. They rose, they fell, and in rising and falling they revealed the sea itself. That's the whole trick of the universe, to hide itself in its own dance, so that it can rediscover itself through your eyes. But the mind doesn't like this revelation, because it ends its game. It has no more rules to enforce, no more sinners to save. So it will try one last illusion. It will whisper, "Ah, I get it, now I'm free, now I've achieved awareness." And again it's caught, because even the desire to be free is another mask of control. Freedom is not an achievement, it's the absence of effort. It's what remains when there's no one left to achieve. The moment you stop reaching for it, you find that it was here all along, like the air, unnoticed until you stop holding your breath. You see, life was never waiting for you to improve. It was waiting for you to relax. When you finally drop the tension of becoming, you begin to be. And in that being, guilt cannot survive, because guilt requires a future in which things could be otherwise. But in the eternal now, nothing could ever have been different. Everything that happened was the only thing that could have happened, given the totality of what is. That's not fatalism, it's freedom from illusion. It means that every regret, every moment of shame, was as necessary to your unfolding as every triumph. They were both notes in the same composition. The symphony would be incomplete without them. And the beauty of it all is that you didn't write the score, you're just playing your part in real time, improvising with the universe. You don't need to apologize to the music. You are the music. This is why, in the deepest sense, guilt is an illusion of isolation. It assumes there's a you apart from life who can somehow act against it. But once you see that you are life, the question of guilt simply dissolves. There's no opposition left, no sinner or saint, no punishment or reward, only the flowing balance of existence. You start to sense this even in small things, the way sunlight hits a wall, the rhythm of footsteps on the pavement, the quiet hum of an evening breeze. Everything whispers the same message. Nothing is out of place. And if nothing is out of place, there is nothing to forgive. This is the point where philosophy ends and direct knowing begins. It's not an idea you can repeat. It's a state you fall into, like sleep, not by trying, but by surrendering. And in that surrender, something ancient inside you relaxes. The old judge retires. The courtroom dissolves. The prisoner walks out into the light and realizes the door was never locked. You don't reach enlightenment, you remember it. You don't become innocent, you recognize that you always were. The game of guilt ends not with triumph, but with a smile, a gentle, knowing smile that says, "Ah, so that's what it was all about." And the mind, seeing that it's been outwitted by its own awareness, falls silent at last. In that silence, you feel a peace that doesn't belong to time, a peace that has never been touched by regret or redemption. It was always here, waiting for you to notice. And when you do, you don't claim it as yours. You simply rest in it. Because now you know you were never guilty. You were only dreaming that you were. And the dream has served its purpose. It woke you up. Now, look what happens when there is no longer anyone left to feel guilty. When the image of you as a separate entity simply vanishes, like mist dissolving in sunlight. You discover something astonishing. What you had been calling yourself was never a fixed thing. It was a pattern, a rhythm in the vast dance of energy. Like a whirlpool in the river, it had a shape, a personality, a movement. But the water itself was never bound to that form. It was always the river, moving freely, without beginning or end. And when you see that, guilt becomes impossible, because who is left to blame? The whirlpool cannot blame the river for its current, nor the wave accuse the ocean of its rise and fall. The illusion of guilt was born the moment the wave said, "I am separate," the moment the universe forgot its own nature, pretending to be a lonely fragment. But now the pretending has ended. You see that every sorrow, Every failure, every secret act of shame was the universe playing hide and seek with itself. And the moment of recognition, this moment, is the laughter of God, realizing he was never lost. That laughter doesn't mock, it liberates. It echoes through every cell of your being, saying, "It's all right. It was always all right." For centuries, humanity has been obsessed with the idea of sin, of debt and redemption, of being unworthy before some cosmic authority. But sin is only the shadow cast by the idea of separation. Once you see that there was never an authority outside of you, the shadow disappears. You are not a guest in this universe. You are the host. You are not a mistake of creation. You are creation itself, momentarily pretending to be flawed. Do you see how utterly simple it is? The guilt you carried was not evidence of imperfection. It was the perfume of awakening. It was life pressing gently against the walls of its own dream, asking to be remembered. And now you remember. You remember that there was never a battle to win, never a judgment to pass, never a soul to save. There was only this infinite play of forms, laughter and tears, birth and death, darkness and light, all belonging to the same wholeness. The freedom you sought was never the absence of guilt. It was the recognition that guilt and innocence were never separate. They are two sides of one movement, two notes of one chord. When you look deeply enough, even your regrets start to shimmer with beauty. They were part of your song, the dissonance that made the resolution so sweet. This is what the mystics meant when they said that heaven and hell are not places but states of mind. The guilty mind lives in hell, the awakened mind lives in heaven, and both were dreams of the same consciousness. Now the dream has lifted, and in its place there is only peace, not the peace of victory, but the peace of understanding. You no longer try to escape the human condition. You embrace it as sacred. You see that to be human is to be divine in disguise, fragile, foolish, magnificent, alive. Every breath, every heartbeat, every glance becomes holy, because you know now that there was never any separation between you and the whole. You don't need to forgive yourself, there's no self left to forgive. You don't need to atone, there's no debt left to pay. You don't need to justify your existence. Existence itself has already justified you by being here, by breathing through you. And so, you rest. For the first time, perhaps, you rest in your own being, without fear, without judgment, without effort. This is the freedom that cannot be earned or lost. It's the freedom of being what you already are. The guilt dissolves. The seeker disappears. The silence remains. And in that silence, something vast and familiar smiles through your eyes. Because you were never separate. You were never fallen. You were never guilty. You were the universe, pretending to forget itself so that it could have the joy of remembering. And now you remember. Now the question arises, what does life look like when guilt has vanished? Does it become careless, chaotic, without conscience? Not at all. In fact, the opposite happens. When you stop trying to be good, you finally begin to act from goodness itself. Because real virtue is effortless. It flows like breath. It doesn't come from trying to match an image of holiness. It comes from being in tune with life. You see, guilt was never a moral compass. It was a form of tension. It made you act from fear, from duty, from the need to repair some imaginary flaw. But now, the movement of life is simple again. It doesn't need to be managed. When guilt is gone, every small thing becomes luminous. You drink a cup of tea, and it's enough. You speak to a stranger, and you feel the echo of the same consciousness looking back at you. You walk, and each step feels like a conversation with the earth. Nothing has changed, yet everything feels alive. You find yourself less reactive, less hurried. You stop correcting people in conversation, stop defending your image, stop rehearsing the past in your mind. You realize how much of your energy was spent maintaining a character, the good person, the repentant soul, the seeker of light. Now that character has retired. You don't need to play the hero in your own story anymore. You don't need to prove that you've learned your lesson or that you deserve peace. Peace is what's left when the play ends. And as you live from that peace, you begin to notice how the world around you mirrors it. People soften, situations resolve more easily. Even difficulties have a rhythm to them. They arise and pass without sticking. You start to see that life was never judging you. It was teaching you through contrast. Pain taught you about tenderness. Loss taught you about love. Mistakes taught you about humility. And now, free of guilt, you can receive all of it with gratitude. You stop dividing experience into right and wrong, success and failure. You start seeing it as movement, a rhythm that carries everything in perfect timing. You realize that the real meaning of forgiveness is understanding that there was never anything outside of life to forgive. From that understanding, compassion blossoms naturally. You don't need to force it. It's the fragrance of awareness. When someone wrongs you, you no longer tighten up or moralize. You see their fear, their conditioning, their humanity. You recognize yourself in them. That doesn't mean you become passive or naive. It means you respond from clarity, not reaction. You can say no without hate, yes without guilt. Because freedom is not lawlessness, it's harmony. Think of a great musician. He doesn't play out of obligation. He plays because the music moves through him. He can bend the rules, improvise, change tempo, but the melody remains beautiful because he's attuned. That's what it means to live without guilt. You live attuned to the moment, playing your part in the symphony of life. And even when the melody changes, you trust it. You trust the silence between notes as much as the notes themselves. You stop fearing the pauses, the endings, the unknown. That's why people who are truly free have such a lightness about them, a humor that doesn't come from mocking life, but from loving it so deeply that even its tragedies seem like elaborate jokes told by the universe. You begin to laugh like that too softly, with wonder, because you see that even your old guilt had beauty in it. It led you here. It was part of the choreography. And now that you've seen through it, you don't despise it, you bow to it. You thank it for the lessons it carried, and you let it go. And in its place, you find something far greater, simplicity. No more inner struggle, no more measuring yourself against ideals, just the clear, unadorned presence of being alive. And that, my friend, is the true morality. Not imposed, not taught, not commanded, simply lived. Because when you live as life itself, every gesture becomes sacred, every mistake becomes music, and every silence becomes prayer. So here we are, back where we began. The same room, the same breath, the same ordinary world. And yet, something has changed. Or perhaps more truthfully, you have changed your way of seeing. The guilt you carried for so long has dissolved into understanding, not because you defeated it, but because you finally saw through it the way sunlight passes through a cloud until only light remains. And now you see life as it is, not as a problem to be solved, but as a mystery to be lived. You wake each morning not with a burden, but with curiosity. You no longer ask, am I worthy? You simply ask, what song will life sing through me today? The mind still rises, of course, with its small worries, its old reflexes, its endless commentary. But you meet it with a soft smile, as you might greet an old friend who once frightened you. Because you know now that even your thoughts are not enemies, they are movements of the same sea. When guilt returns, as all old guests do, you pour it a cup of tea. You say, ah, there you are again. And before long, it fades away, because it has no power in the house of awareness. This is what it means to live without guilt, not to become pure, but to become whole. To see that every part of you, the shadow, the light, the laughter, the pain, belongs to the same vast dance. And once you see that, you no longer resist the rhythm. You sway with it, you breathe with it, you laugh with it. You see the universe not as a test, but as a performance, a cosmic improvisation where even the wrong notes are part of the music. And the beauty of it all is that the dance never ends. The stars continue their spiral, the tides continue their breathing, and you, yes, you continue to play your role in the infinite symphony of being. But now, you play it knowingly. You no longer confuse the costume for the dancer, the mask for the face. You realize that what you truly are has never done anything right or wrong. It has only been endlessly, perfectly, playfully being. So you bow to yourself, to the universe, to the mystery that makes them one and the same. And as you bow, you smile, because you understand at last that you were never guilty. You were never separate. You were the laughter behind it all, the gentle smile of the universe, remembering itself through your eyes.